Welcome back in. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. It is NFL Draft Eve. Tomorrow night, all of the drama, all of the subterfuge, all of the negging, all of the sort of behind-the-scenes lying officially comes out into the forefront. Will Cain joins us now. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't know that there's anything more perfect than several years ago with the NFL draft when the Laramie Tunsil smoking weed in a gas mask video. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Came out right before the draft, and then Laramie Tunsil basically went in for his post-draft interview and said that he had been paid by Ole Miss, and like everything just kind of went up in smoke, no pun intended there. I don't know that we will ever have a more crazy opening of an NFL draft than and for those of you out there who don't remember this, I think it was like 30 minutes before the draft started, on his own account, if I remember correctly, someone had access to Laramie Tunsil's Twitter account, and they posted a video of him smoking weed in a gas mask at Ole Miss, and immediately, like, everything just kind of came undone. And obviously, so, knock on wood, there haven't been a ton of like, oh, let's go see what this guy tweeted when he was 14 years old stories, at least not so far, but we seem like we always get one of those. But that, to me, just kind of perfectly epitomized the great carnival excess that the draft has become.
You know, and that's the most comedic situation I can think of, because more of them become more serious. Like you point out, somebody's going to dig up some 14-year-old's tweet, some Heisman Trophy winner, some number one overall draft pick's tweet when he was 16.
Yeah.
I remember Lyle Collins, offensive lineman, LSU.
Oh, that's a great one, too. That's a serious one. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Out of nowhere, he's somehow a person of interest in a murder investigation into the death of his old girlfriend, and it totally tanked his draft stock. He wasn't drafted at all.
Well, I mean, you can understand why. If they were like, hey, who are you thinking of hiring? And one of our contracts were up, and they were like, the next headline was Will Cain investigated for alleged, or Clay Travis alleged murder involvement. I'd be like, hey, the agent would probably get on the phone and be like, yeah, this is not great for your overall viability in the marketplace when you're a person of interest in a murder trial. You're probably not going to be able to get signed anywhere.
But he wasn't. He wasn't guilty. It went on.
Yeah, right.
He went
Yes.
The Cowboys signed him as a free agency. And great situation for the Cowboys, because he was a top 10 draft pick as well. That went totally undrafted. But yeah, he was cleared in that. So that's a more serious one that changes the whole equation just a day or two before the draft. But hey, something's going to happen. I mean, they're going to dig up somebody's tweets. Didn't they already try with Mac Jones? Wasn't there a quick?
There may have already been. I think this whole
maybe some of that's losing
thing,
steam.
I think it's starting to lose steam. I really do. I think this sort of this idea that we should be judging kids. My analogy on it, Will, for a long time has been, as a society, we made a decision that almost all the time, if you are a minor, i.e., you commit a crime at under 18 years old, we expunge it once you become an adult, because we don't believe that stupid things kids did, even if they're serious. You could rob someone at 14 or 15 years old, and we could be like, hey, by the time you're 18, you're a different person. We're not going to hold that against you for the rest of your life. So if we expunge robbery records and we expunge all these serious charges, how in the world can you say we got to hold a kid accountable for a tweet he sent when he was 14 or 15 years old? I just think everybody out there, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, any parent is like terrified. I know you are probably. I know I've spent time trying to talk to my kids about, hey, you got to be careful what you put out into the world on TikTok, or the text messages that you send to your friends, or whatever you post on Twitter, and my kids are not active on social media that I know of, or Facebook or Instagram or whatever else. Because you well know, Will, every 14 or 15-year-old, especially boys, this has been my argument for a long time, there is no group of people on the planet that thinks they are smarter and cooler and actually is less cool and less smart than the 14 or 15-year-old boy. You remember that, Will. Like, you think you and your friends are all such badasses, and everybody who looks at you are like, you are such a nincompoop. You don't even know what you don't know. And so that bravado mixed with early adolescence for boys in particular often leads to disastrous decisions. There's never a girl whose final two words are "watch this." There are tons of boys all over the country, right? That just do stupid things. And so you combine that with social media, and it's just a recipe for disaster. No matter who your kid is, like if you're a parent, you just lie awake sometimes in bed at night, like that knucklehead is going to do something stupid. I just know it.
Well, you're 100% right, and I can't believe the self-seriousness with which so many journalists, some of whom I know, have taken these tweets from 14-year-olds, whoever may be, Josh Allen,
it's crazy.
Tyler Murray. I can't understand how they find any journalistic integrity or value out of that, much less personal virtue in digging up the tweets of 13, 14, 15-year-olds, even 16, 17-year-olds. And by the way, my kids aren't on social. Well,
yeah, mine aren't either that you know of.
That's what I was going to say. My kids don't have phones, but they have iPads.
Yep, same.
And my younger son told me my 13-year-old's on TikTok. I go, really? I don't know what device he's using that for, and then he's not posting, but he's just looking at other people. So I have as much control as I think I have. You know what I mean? But I'll tell you this, Clay. I do have a nephew who is. I mean, he's big time. He's the number one offensive lineman in the state of Texas for the 23 class.
Oh wow!
And I've told him, hey man,
scrub everything, delete everything that you've ever sent.
I was gonna say I don't think he's ever said anything bad. He's a great kid, but again, he's 15, 16 years old. I mean, they're gonna look through anything you've ever said, and create something possibly, even if it's not there.
Yep.
So I've given him that talk. Like, you got to be careful because you're a target for whatever reason.
What I tell all these kids out there is, because I do think there's a level of blindness, because you think, hey, the people I'm interacting with are my high school friends, like my middle school friends, whatever else. If you're listening to me right now, I would tell you this right now. If you're like 16 years old and you're getting ready to apply to college, if you're an athlete, if you're anybody that's trying to get a job, I would scrub your social media accounts and start anew when you are 18 years old, and understand that everything you send is going to be looked at. And I do this, Will. I don't know about you, but we get a lot of applications to work at Outkick. And most of them I leave to the business side to like go through and look at resumes and everything else. But they'll come to me sometimes and be like, hey, we're down to these three people. Do you know any of these three people? Do you have any kind of personal interaction, any sort of thought about it? And one of the first things I do is just type them in on Google and go see what their social media profiles look like, right? Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is, just because that is a rough approximation. Like, that is what your billboard is, right? Like, that's your front porch of whatever you are advertising to be. And it can be good. I can go look at it and I can be like, oh, this is really funny. This person's witty. I like the takes. Or I can be like, yeah, this is really not something that seems like it's a good fit. And that's one of the first, before I even talk to a person, that's one of the first things I do. And I would guarantee you there are a lot of people hiring in companies that's the first thing they do. And you can cost yourself a job faster than you can get yourself a job, it seems to me, on social media.
Yeah, and so I'll bet you, by the way, we're not done with this. So in the next day or two,
what
do you want to bet? What do you want to bet the odds? By the way, they're sitting on the story. They've already done it.
They wait till the last minute. Yes.
100%.
That is a great question. And what I would say in general is, and some people say, like, why do you even because this is a good question too, and I'm curious what your reaction is. If those stories happen, and I would say it's 50-50, and that might be unfair. So if I were setting odds, I'd say like even money both sides, that somebody who's a first-rounder is going to have a tweet or an Instagram post or something that people have decided is offensive.
Have we had it every year? I think
just
Tyler,
about every year.
Josh Allen, the Bosa brothers. I think you could almost do it every year. There's somebody who comes in for the target.
Yeah.
So if we don't get it this year, that would be a huge aberration.
Drew Lock had it and it was like an 8th grade tweet, I think, that he had sent. I mean, this is like craziness. So some people say, like, why do you give these stories oxygen? And this is a good question for you. And it is so. As Outkick has gotten bigger, and I'm sure you had to make some of these decisions too with your radio show, and I certainly know you have to do it with your Fox News show on the weekends. People say, like, you make a story like this bigger than it otherwise would be. And I think there's some truth to that. And so my rationale is The only way to end stories like this is by ridiculing the people who write the stories such that they are embarrassed when they are called out. And what I love about this, by the way, this happened recently when Dan Campbell got hired in Detroit. Well, almost every one of the guys who writes this story has worse tweets in their own background. Did you see the guy at the Detroit News Free Press? He was like, back in 1998, before the Texas game, Dan Campbell said something like, "I'm proud to go to Texas A&M where men are still men," or something like that, like taking a shot. I'm paraphrasing, but it was some sort of shot at Texas masculinity where you went to University of Texas. And like that's a big rivalry, and it was like relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, right? And also, by the way, it's like 20-some-odd years old, and the writer was like, this has homophobic connotations, like this is unacceptable. And then a bunch of people went into that writer's background, and he had way worse tweets that he had sent, right? As an adult, not as a college kid. Almost always. The people who claim that they are these paragons of virtue who are out there trying to police what other people have said almost always have worse things that they themselves have said.
Yep. So you asked the question, do we make this story bigger? Why?
It's a good question, right?
So first of all, I'd say this. I'm going to speak in the we pronoun because you cover these stories, I cover these stories. We didn't create these stories. We didn't bring these stories into the spotlight. Now, are we supposed to ignore them now that somebody else has written them, made them part of the news cycle? Or do we rebut those stories? Do we provide the alternate point of view, the needed perspective? I don't think we're blowing it up by doing that after someone else brings it into the circle. What more, I would say, you need to rebut it. You need to sort of bring that context because the truth is these stories, no matter how big they get, they are dictating not only the culture, but the facts of an individual situation. So that story can stay small-ish, but that's still going to impact Kyler Murray's life or Josh Allen's life or whoever's life, right? It doesn't matter if you and I talk about it. The writer's already done something to impact. When Josh Allen walks into that locker room with the Buffalo Bills, he now has to prove he's not a racist to everyone in that locker room because this writer brought it in. Even if you and I never say a thing, the price has already been paid. So I don't think we make it bigger. I think we provide needed perspective on that story. I think that's the damage is already done, and we have to be the ones that provide the reality and the truth behind it.
That's a strong argument as well. Okay, a couple of stories that I want to hit. Let's start with the NFL draft. How excited are you for tomorrow's NFL draft? I know you're a Dallas Cowboy fan. The Cowboys picked 10th overall. Patrick Surtain seems to be the guy that is most likely for the Cowboys to take. Just sort of assess the NFL draft from your perspective in general, and what do you think your Cowboys do?
I think it's my favorite sporting event of the year, even more than anything that happens on the field. I can't explain it. It's always been that way.
I love the draft, too. It's amazing, yeah.
I poured over it when it was only in the newspaper. I watched day 2 and 3 as intently as I watched the first round. I love it. I don't know what it is. I can't explain it. It's like Christmas Day shopping for sports. And
yes.
And I did this on the Will Cain podcast. I broke down my hope for the Cowboys. I don't think it's going to happen. I want Kyle Pitts if he falls. I don't care.
Good luck. Defense. Yeah.
Score 55 points. Just do it. I'll play that kind of football. Take one of the 2 big offensive linemen, Sewell or Slater, and then Surtain or Horn, like that, because they need a cornerback. And look, I did this on the podcast this week. I went, what do you find in rounds 2, 3, and 4? How do you make Friday and Saturday fun? Because truly, that's when teams become championship teams, by hitting in the 3rd round, by hitting in the 4th round. You're not supposed to miss in the 1st round, even though we know there's about a 50-50 proposition on bust to pan out rate. But that 2nd and 3rd and 4th round, man, I'm telling you, that's when you get rich in the NFL.
I don't think there's any doubt at all. We're talking to Will Cain. He's got a podcast. Search it out, Will Cain. Also, Fox and Friends, Saturday and Sunday morning, 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern. All right. I don't know if you read it. I bet you did. The open letter from a Los Angeles Police Department 24-year veteran to LeBron James, I thought was extraordinary. Now, I'm sure LeBron is going to dodge responding. I bet most in the media will allow him to not even have to respond to the offer. But to me, that represents everything that should be going on if we really want to talk about the intersection of athletics and the battles that are going on in our culture today. The the way to solve things, as you well know, is usually through conversation and mutual understanding, as opposed to standing on the sidelines, which often happens, and deciding that somebody is either a saint or a devil and demonizing the police, which is going on right now, which I think many athletes are guilty of. What did you think of that letter? What do you think about what do you think about LeBron's likely response, if anything?
Well, LeBron won't respond at all. You and I both know that. I think that letter's needed. Look, I think LeBron has become, at least in the world of sports, the single most destructive force when it comes to race relations in the United States. And I think he is absolutely doing more harm than good. Let's be clear, LeBron has done a lot of great things. He started schools. Of course, he's an amazing basketball player. He's given to charitable causes. But that doesn't absolve him of the terrible things he's doing to tear this country apart. He's ignoring facts. He's imposing a narrative on every situation. The narrative is racist white cops killing African Americans, and in his words, literally hunting them down in the street. And that was one of the worst examples I can think of where he just didn't care at all for the facts, the situation on the hand, the video that was easily accessible. And because LeBron's done that, Clay, people have no conception of what reality is. Before I ever knew you, one of the big things you did, and I heard you on the radio, I don't think we'd ever spoken, was put into context the situation which absolutely takes over not just our airwaves, but our culture. And, there's a poll out. It's called Skeptic something. I can't remember the name of the exact poll, but it asks people how many unarmed African-American men are killed by police every year. And 80% of liberals believe the number is above 100. 50% of liberals believe the number is between 1,000 and 10,000. And 20% of conservatives believe the number is north of 1,000. When in 2019, according to the Washington Post data, the actual number is 14. 14. Now, I know
in a country of 330 million, 14.
Yes. And I know you've been highlighting those numbers for years, Clay. But the fascinating thing is, again, I did this on my most recent episode of my podcast, how many buddies called me and go, man, I had no idea that was the number. I'm like, I know you don't.
Facts and data don't matter because we have a world that's ruled by viral anecdote, and athletes are succumbing to that world more aggressively than almost anyone because they really do believe. Like, I think LeBron believes that what he is saying is true. I think if LeBron ever actually interacted with anybody, I think if you actually put the facts and data in front of him, his mind would be blown. And by the way, this is what I've tried to do with COVID too, right? Like, under 50 years old, the New York Times kind of buried it on the back page of their Sunday edition. But if you're under 50, right, which a huge majority of my audience is that's listening to us right now, if you got COVID, you had a 1 in 50,000 chance of actually dying of COVID. You were almost more likely to be murdered than you were to die of COVID. I think people out there hearing that stat are blown away because the number of 20 and 30-somethings that I'll see on social media who are like, I haven't been outside in the last year. If you had a friend, think about this, Will. If you had a friend and that friend told you, I was thinking about going out to dinner, but I'm worried that I'm going to get murdered, you would be like, what? What? Hold up. You're not going outside because you're afraid of getting murdered. You would be like, I think you need to go see a psychiatrist because your ability to analyze risk is so fundamentally flawed, yet tons of people in their 20s and 30s have said that for a year about COVID. And the same thing, like LeBron James said that but before he said the crazy thing about being hunted in the streets, he said that he was afraid for his son to go outside because a cop might kill him. And I said, oh, my God. Like, if the data is you're more likely to be killed by a bee, a wasp, or a hornet than you are if you are unarmed to be killed by a police officer. And the analogy I drew was I said, imagine if you're a parent. Imagine if you came on my show, Will, and you were like, I'm really nervous this weekend. I'm nervous all the time. I was like, what for? He's like, I'm afraid when my kids go to school today that a bee, a wasp, or a hornet is going to kill them. You would again say, hey, you need psychological help, right? Like, you are not parenting in a healthy way. Yet that's more likely for LeBron, even leaving aside his race and wealth and the fact that changes everything, right? Because if you're in a wealthy neighborhood, your risks are lower for all sorts of violent issues. But LeBron is spreading things that are fundamentally not true, and he's playing on people's fears, and it's to the detriment, as you said, of the overall society. I mean, it's awful.
So it's not just altering people's perceptions. This narrative, which is false, is altering people's reality. We're responding to a narrative.
That's well said.
We're tribalizing ourselves. There's more tension between the races today. We're defunding police. We're actually changing reality based upon a falsehood. You know, and the other thing about this is that it doesn't even take into account the number 14. It doesn't even take into account other factors like, well, how many of these are in the context of the person not complying? Like, one good way to not, you know, have a bad interaction with the law is completely comply. That happened with Dante Wright. You know, it's a tragic situation, and it is an injustice, but it wouldn't have happened if he had complied with the officer's orders. So this is part of the story that we never put into it. It all is boiled down to very simply another example of systemic racism. And by the way, Clay, this is worth being said. Racism does exist.
Yes.
There are bad incidences of police brutality. I think what happened with Ahmaud Arbery, while not a police situation, is clearly a horrible injustice. These situations exist, but when we act like 14 of them, 14 in a year, is what our major societal problem is. Not the 7,000 African Americans murdered every year, or whatever else may be afflicting any community's situation. When we give all this hyperventilation and attention to one single issue, we do it not just at the detriment of other things that you could solve, but of reality. We are changing reality.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And you're also, and I think that's what's so good about the LA police officer, 24-year veteran reaching out to LeBron James is we paint with broad brushes. Social media makes us paint with even broader brushes than we ordinarily would. And it's no surprise that the murder rate is skyrocketing all over this country at the same time that we're saying police can't be trusted. We are, as a society, actually getting the worst possible result. We are increasing tension both from the citizens that police are in charge of protecting and for police. And when athletes could come out, as you said, and just say, hey, if a police officer gives you an instruction, follow it, almost no police shootings would ever need to occur. And by the way, we should point out, too, that unarmed doesn't mean without danger, because you can be unarmed and in a position where you're like you've got somebody that you're choking to death, right? You can be unarmed and you can be punching and kicking and threatening someone in a major way. And so these interactions are incredibly rare, but unarmed doesn't even mean that you're without danger. You can be on the verge of killing someone, as, by the way, was the case in Columbus, Ohio, with the police officer that LeBron James took issue with it. Will, I appreciate all the time you spend with us. Another Wednesday edition. Encourage you to go sign up for Will Cain's podcast and also continue to watch him 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Fox and Friends on Saturday and Sunday morning.
All right. Thanks, Clay.
Good luck to the Cowboys, but not too much luck. When we come back, my final draft for the top 10 players that I think are going to go in order, I will give it to you. Then Thursday we will have the actual mock draft.